for joining us this evening for the June steering committee meeting. I realize this marks now a year since we started. Our first meeting was June of 2021. So thanks everyone for sticking with us for a year so far. Got probably about a year left on this plan if everything goes well. So maybe the halfway point. As I said in the email on Friday, tonight we're going to be sort of going over some draft recommendation direction to try to get some feedback on that. So we're going to run this a little bit differently. Instead of doing a presentation, I'm going to sort of share some documents that we can look through and get your feedback on. We want to start with the vision statements. As you all recall, you helped us draft some vision statements back last fall based on what we heard from the community in the first round of engagement. And then we shared those with the community in the second round. So we've gotten some feedback on them, generally positive feedback. We asked folks how they felt about them. Most folks agreed or strongly agreed with what was in the vision statements. And then we asked for comments and feedback on how to improve them. So we've gone through those and made a few minor changes to some of the vision statements. So I want to share those with you so that we can just check these changes to the vision statements before we sort of finalize them. So just as a reminder, the vision statements set the overall goal for the plan that all the other recommendations will support, consistent with citywide plans like Comp Plan and Blueprint Denver, and based on what we heard from the community in that first round of engagement. So in the land use and built form vision statement, just a couple minor additions. We're talking about the corridors full of local businesses and entertainment options with distinct building designs, complete with sustainable and resilient landscaping, and also recognizing that we need compatible transitions to the surrounding areas to make sure that they fit in appropriately. And then we're talking about how residents navigate around the area, just adding in parks as a destination, an important destination that people want to be able to get to. A lot of the comments we got were either things that they disagreed entirely with sort of the premise that that we need to accommodate additional growth in the area, things like that aren't consistent with citywide plans, or there were things like there needs to be more about mobility in this when we have a whole separate mobility vision statement to address that. So those were the majority of the comments. So that's why there's relatively few changes here. Any questions or concerns about these changes to the land use and built form vision statement? Okay, taking that as a positive. Similarly, for housing and economy, just a couple minor changes. This is really just a clarity thing, the way these are ordered. And then wanted to add more about both income restricted, subsidized affordable housing and naturally occurring affordable housing, making sure that we're maintaining and providing both of those within Near Southeast. So just adding that additional clarification. No one objects to that one. Moving on to mobility. Not any changes proposed to this one. Again, most of the comments were positive, and a lot of the other comments were it needs to talk more about land use or something like that that we covered in the other vision statements. And so finally, for quality of life infrastructure, just wanted to add in that the canals and other locations are providing exercise and other opportunities year round. That was a good suggestion we got from the community to clarify that. So again, if anyone has any questions or concerns about any of these changes, let us know. Otherwise, we'll sort of finalize these vision statements. If something comes up and we need to revisit them, we can, but for the most part, these will be sort of the set vision statements that we'll move forward with at this point.
Scott, will you be sending this presentation out to us?
Yeah, certainly these vision statements we can send out and you can take another look.
Please. It'd be great.
Yep, no problem. All right. Now let's get into some of the recommendations. So, like I said, instead of putting together a PowerPoint, I've got another Word doc here that we have pulled in some of the community feedback we've gotten in the surveys and whatnot, and then also outlined for some of these topics the direction we think we're going. So we haven't gotten to fully drafting these recommendations, but before we do, we wanted to sort of run the direction by them, what we're thinking, to make sure that we're going in the right direction. So what we've done is we've picked out some of the topics and recommendations that we think are either ones that we want some additional feedback on before we get into really drafting the recommendation, or things that we think are potentially controversial that we want to run past you before we share them with the wider public, to see if we're saying something stupid, or if you raise any red flags or anything like that that we really need to rethink before this goes out to a general audience. So so we're not going to go through everything, as we've talked about. This plan covers a lot of topics. For a lot of them, we think we have a good sense, and we don't expect them to be too controversial. So we're working on drafting those. But for these ones that we're going to highlight tonight, are ones that we want to run past you. So yeah, it'll be some community feedback, background information, and then talking through sort of what the idea is. So let me go ahead and share this one as well. All right, so starting with sort of mixed use development along the corridors and in the centers and things like that, we asked about how growth should be distributed in near Southeast, where we want to direct additional growth or additional height. And we've got some different, or some fairly even distribution on the options here. So there's not a clear winner between how folks would like to see growth distributed, more concentrated at centers, or more distributed along the corridors or things like that. So yeah, and then I'll go through these, and then we'll talk about sort of the direction. Looking at Evans specifically, asking folks what development options they liked. It was the low scale suburban and the semi-urban, the ones that got the most support. And remember, these are the ones that we had the photos for. So this is low scale suburban and this is semi-urban in terms of what people were most attracted to. And then looking at what sort of urban design elements people thought were most important for the Evans corridor: wider sidewalks, more street trees and landscaping and things like that, and also moving parking from in front of buildings to the back or the side or in garages or things like that, are the ones that rest at the top. Now thinking about the transit stations, Colorado and Yale, asked folks which they preferred. It was the semi-urban center that got the most votes there, which again is this photo here. Yale, mid-scale and the semi-urban both got the largest share there. So that is mid-scale and semi-urban, what folks liked. And then when we asked sort of what design elements people wanted to prioritize in new mixed-use development, landscaping came out clearly on top. Where the parking is and sort of variation in the building design or massing and setbacks also received a fair number of votes. And then looking at some of the comments we received, folks wanted more walkable destinations in near Southeast while maintaining the character of residential areas. More local community serving shops, those good transitions to neighborhoods, more opportunities for density, mixed use development, and affordable housing at the station areas, as long as they stay safe or safety is improved in those areas. Wider sidewalks, deeper setbacks on some of the buildings, so moving them a little bit further back from the street with better landscaping along the streets. More interesting designs, more sort of unique and varied buildings, and improved sustainability with development. And then some folks asking for more parking, and some folks asking for other modes to get to transit stations specifically. So, you know, specifically at the transit locations, the Yale and Colorado, both desire for more parking and more alternative modes to get there. And then thinking about the local centers, where potentially we could have new mixed-use development within neighborhoods, where churches or other institutional uses leave, repurposing those buildings or properties for mixed use, or along larger intersections or major streets, creating an opportunity for redevelopment there. And in terms of the scale of those, the 3-story urban got the most votes. So that's this style of development here. And what folks would like to see, restaurants, coffee shops, more general shopping, retail, bars and entertainment, and open spaces are rising to the top there. In terms of adding new local centers, some folks are very interested in that opportunity. Some folks are less so, don't really want to see that change within their neighborhoods. And encouraging looking at vacant or underutilized properties as opportunities to introduce some new or different uses. So that was, again, running through some of the community input we've gotten on those topics. So now I'm going to start going through what we're thinking in terms of direction. So for Evans, we know we need to improve mobility. So improving network connections along the corridor and from the corridor into the neighborhoods, and improving transit, walking, and biking options in the area. Enhancing the look and feel of the corridor, so it's a place people want to spend time. And we can talk in a minute here about sort of more specifically what those design recommendations are, a few bullets down. And then we're currently looking at how we can sort of advance mobility improvements and safety improvements in the area more quickly. And so we're looking at some options for how we can do some concurrent design or concurrent studies to make Evans function better from a mobility standpoint. So let me pause there. Any questions or concerns about this sort of general direction for the Evans corridor?
Scott, here, let me turn my video on. I hate being invisible. I would just say, as far as Evans goes, if there's large amounts of underutilized property, it would be along the Evans corridor. I think when we're looking at, land that we could, in volume, that we could recreate something wonderful. Just another thing to look at as we hone in on Evans. I mean, I look at the old, what's the old bakery site? Large one-story building sitting back off the street.
Right.
So lots of room. I know Councilwoman Black would probably join me in sneaking out late at night and, doing a monkey wrench gang on all the storage sites along Evans.
Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
Yes.
Don't forget these meetings are. Don't forget these meetings are recorded. So don't
I
say anything
understand.
All right. Yeah. Great suggestion. Spencer.
Same vein for Evans. I don't know if it's just the zoning right now or whatever, but it seems like all the development on Evans is either like, I mean, we've got that Carvana, we're getting a couple gas stations. It doesn't seem like there's anything that really would draw somebody down Evans. And again, I don't know if that's just a zoning thing but looking in towards the future, something that actually entices people to come down Evans besides gas or to buy a car.
Yeah, definitely.
I just keep going back to I think one of our early meetings, and just the discussions on some form of entertainment center. People were talking about the old Rainbow Music Hall, that was on Evans, and Evans has the land.
Right. Yep, definitely. Jared.
And just to clarify, the scope is basically Evans from, is it Colorado Boulevard to Monaco? Like if we're talking about the whole scope there?
Yeah, sort of almost to Quebec. It sort of goes out of the city as it goes, as it jogs down Iliff there, right?
Yeah, as it bends there. Okay. Yeah, I was just gonna probably echo Councilman Cashman that there are probably the largest plots in the area are in fact on Evans. So you have there at Colorado and Evans, right near the Deco building. You've got potential a lot of lots that are going to turn, and there might not be any larger spaces. So I don't know how you note that, and it feels like a broken record, but Evans is the make or break for Southeast Denver. So Southeast Denver's character and quality of life will either rise or fall on what happens on Evans. And currently it's not exactly rising. I feel like, I think that's been echoed as well. And so whatever the plan can do and understanding the limits of the plan, I think it's just recognizing that if Denver wants to see some of these big things happen for Denver 2040, Evans is really where some resources need to be put. And I at least want to go back and highlight again the mobility study. It feels like anything that we can do to not just have opinions about Evans, but actually have data that says that there needs to be some funds moved in that direction, I would be all for.
Great, thanks. Jim.
Scott, maybe the second or third what I've just heard. I've lived for 44 years right near the intersection of Monaco and Evans. And what I've seen over that length of time is basically, I traverse it a lot, by automobile between I-25 and Evans and Monaco and Evans. I've seen it go from old industrial to slightly newer industrial. You know, the mention was made of gas stations going in and stuff, and it's nice to see new things going in. But if it's possible, you know, something that might soften the look of that mile and a half stretch or so. That's just, I'm agreeing with what everybody's saying.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Councilwoman Black.
Thanks. I would like to point out that Evans has improved since I've been on the council. Paul Cashman and I have worked very hard for some positive changes. So I do think we're heading in the right direction. The Kmart is being redeveloped, and it's going to be a nice development with a street grid and separated sidewalks with trees. It'll be a nice addition to the area, and adding more people will attract different kind of businesses. But right now it is a car oriented street, and that's why people who own gas stations want to put them there. And so, you know, it's market driven. But the Colorado station is really improving a lot. They've got the Junction Food Hall now, which is great. And lots of people were requesting some kind of food hall, and we got one. So I hope all of you go there so they stay in business. And, you know, there is a movie theater there and Dave and Buster's. So it is an entertainment destination of sorts. I despise the Deco apartments, but, you know, as I said, new residents mean, and more residents mean that different kinds of retail and restaurants will be attracted to the area. And someone mentioned the corner of Colorado and Evans, and that will be redeveloped, and it will be either apartments or hotels, and it will be a nice design because there was an agreement made when they rezoned it. And so it will, I feel strongly that it will end up being a nice looking building. So something good will happen there. So Evans needs a lot of love and a lot of work, but I just wanted to point out that it has gotten better. And I've always said if we got Colorado, something good at Colorado and Evans and something good at Monaco and Evans, that it would start to fill in. So I'm hopeful that that's what happens.
Yeah, thanks. Jenny.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Councilwoman Black, because yes, I recognize those improvements, and hopefully in the North University Hills neighborhood, University Hills North, that we can piggyback on what's been happening between Colorado and I-25 on Evans in that corridor. I have huge aspirations for like a Pearl Street in that corridor on Warren, just south of Evans, but I have no power. But anyway, I wanted to piggyback on what Jim said on something to soften the look of the corridor. And I think it's really crucial. And I don't know that this can be part of the plan, but the utility lines need to go away. That will begin the softening, I think, just getting rid of those utility lines.
I'm going to respond to that. Jenny, we all agree with you. And Councilman Cashman and I have been asking for that for 7 years, but we have to do the Evans study first. And there is money to bury power lines, but it's a very lengthy process. But just know that we agree with you and we will keep advocating for that.
A thumbs up.
Is the bearing of those utility lines, especially around major corridors, kind of part of the road safety plan? I mean, those things are like 16-inch thick tree trunks. If you hit one of them, they're probably not moving.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know that we really think about it from that perspective, but you're right that those are potential barriers or things that could cause more damage in the event of a crash. All right. That was
Hey,
all.
Scott, really quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I know that there was something in the plan about trying to reduce fatalities. And I don't know if everybody's seen the signs on Evans where there's now a sign up that says the person's name who passed away in a traffic related fatality on Evans. And it says this was a accident that could have been, avoided. So again, to pull on whatever emotional needs that need to get clear about there are like actual harm of life the way that it's operating right now. So I don't know how you compel both the head and the heart that like this isn't just we're trying to make it look prettier. It's like we're actually wanting kids to be safe walking to school. We want people driving to be safe, or however they're using Evans. So
Great. Yeah, absolutely. Erica.
I'm just wondering to Councilwoman Black and Cashman and Councilman Cashman, if there's anything that we as a community can do to help speed along the process. Can we, I don't know, pull together groups of the community that would help speed along the process of burying the power lines, or is it kind of past that point?
You're muted, Councilman. Councilman, you were muted if you were trying to respond to that.
Thank you. I hit all the wrong buttons and disappeared completely. No, Erica, what I would tell you is, yeah, absolutely. Lending your voice certainly won't hurt. But as the councilwoman said, Excel is ready, willing, and able to underground the power lines, but they're waiting for Denver to come up with a plan of how they're going to address Evans, because it impacts the properties all along that corridor. So we want to do it once and do it well. But yeah, it wouldn't hurt at all to get as many voices expressing that sentiment.
Yeah, and my understanding from talking to folks in Dottie is that it is a bit complicated with the amount of right of way there and the other things that are already underground. And so, yeah, it will. We've heard you loud and clear. It's a priority of the community, and we certainly want to move forward with it. But it is something that will take some figuring out. Judy.
I just wanted to share with you, I was part of the Lowry Economic Commission years ago when Lowry's transferred over to Denver. And with COVID and everything, I had not been in that area for the last couple of years until yesterday. And I was amazed and pleased to see, after crossing Alameda, to see the trees on the west side of the street and on the east side of the street, the large buildings that have been built there. But I think it's been very well done. And you're talking about trees on Evans, and you can go over there and see what's happened with trees in these large buildings. And I think it was a very good plan. I'm very pleased with how it turned out. So something to think about when you're looking at Evans and some of the new construction going on of what the possibilities are. So just wanted to share that with you.
Yeah, thankful. That's helpful. It's always good to have examples of what people like and that we can potentially model off of. All right. That was all really good feedback. Thank you, everyone, for that. So now thinking about heights, as we go into the draft recommendations and alternatives, we're going to be putting together some alternatives, looking at where additional height should go in the community. So we wanted to sort of talk through what the potential heights are with you before we start, again, sharing maps with the community with new heights on them. So a couple things to keep in mind. One, as Councilwoman Black was saying, with additional height, with additional development and new people, we get benefits, right? We can support more businesses, we can support more robust transit. We see redevelopment into the form that this plan will call for. So there are benefits that come with this new height. It's not just about accommodating people. It is encouraging investment in the community to benefit the community and the residents of the community. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that what I have here on the page are the maximum heights allowed by zoning. That doesn't mean every building will be that height. As you see now in the corridor, there are areas with 3, 5 taller story zoning, but we still have a lot of one-story buildings and things like that. And that will continue to be the case, even as things redevelop. Not everything will be developed to the maximum height. So don't think about this as necessarily creating a uniform height, but just what are the maximum heights that are appropriate for the area. And then another thing to keep in mind is that on Monday, City Council passed the Expanding Housing Affordability program, which as part of it included incentives that if developers provide additional affordable housing beyond the base that they're not required to provide, they can get additional height in certain locations, including most centers and corridors at 3 stories or above. So the reason all of these now have ranges on them, 3 to 4, 5 to 7, is that represents now the base zone maximum height and the incentive maximum height. So I know this is a little complicated. If you have questions, let me know. I'm happy to try to explain this in another way if it helps. But now under the new regulations, anywhere that has mixed use 3-story zoning, a developer could come in and build a 4-story development if they provide additional affordable housing at a certain set percentage. So if we're recommending 3-story zoning, that really means up to 4 in certain circumstances. Again, not every development will take advantage of it. It's really providing additional affordable housing, which a lot of developers don't want to do. But as we're thinking about the heights, we just have to keep this in mind now that it's not just one height we're thinking about, it's sort of 2 heights that we're thinking about. So Dustin, a question about that before we start talking about the actual heights?
Yeah, I might just jump ahead after that. The Evans, given all the discussion we just had on Evans, 5 to 7 heights, floors along Evans. So you have a very narrow road, which kind of sucks to begin with. And then you're going to have 7-story buildings flanking it. That's going to be a terrible drive for so many reasons, especially if there isn't like setback requirements. That seems, I can't think of many 3 to 4-story buildings there currently. So it might not happen, but at some point, 20 years in the future, that bit between like 25 and even Holly, and they're all 5 to 7 stories high, that without any changes to the road or the setbacks, that's just going to feel like a canyon of buildings and bad traffic.
Yeah, I hear you. A couple other things to keep in mind is, all of these recommendations go together. So all the stuff we were just talking about, improving Evans, we will want to see movement on that before we start seeing some of this height probably. And then also we'll talk in a minute about some of the design improvements we would like to see. So try to think about it as sort of a future condition with an improved Evans and improved design. Could these heights be appropriate?
So I guess just on that one then,
Yeah.
I could see with improvements to Evan, it might not be as bad, but how do we know they're guaranteed to go hand in hand?
Right. Yeah, and that's a good point that we will need to think about is, are there triggers that, we're not going to go with these upzonings until certain improvements are made or other changes come into place first. Those are recommendations that we could explore if the committee and the community think it's important to sequence some of these things.
Yeah, I think with, out of that list, that's probably the most concerning of the lot. The others are at least a bit more either not as high or the roads would support that kind of development. But Evans needs a lot of work before I would think that's a good idea.
Yeah, totally hear you. Christopher.
I just had a quick question. I didn't read the final proposal that got approved on Monday. Did the proposal have in it about the incentive height if a developer did want to, say, add 2 floors or whatever it might be, if you already zoned 5 stories, that it basically is just looked like if you're next to a protected district, there is upper story setbacks and you're still getting some relief. It's just not a completely add 2 stories and you don't have that. And or is there any areas that if you're near residential that you can't get the incentive height?
Yes, yeah, the protected district standards still apply. And so, that, for those not familiar, limits heights within a certain distance of certain residential zone districts. So for the most part, it creates this sort of step back effect. On some smaller lots, it could fully limit the height. And so those limits will still apply. So even if someone takes advantage of the incentive, they still have to comply with the protected district setbacks.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, good question. Scott?
Yeah, I guess just kind of piggybacking off of what Christopher just said, that I think the transitions are important with that. I think this list as proposed feels appropriate height-wise, but I know the transitions between has been something that's been really important for my neighborhood specifically. There's been some new development on Bleedsdale, and as part of that, there was quite a bit of concern from the neighborhood about height and making sure that the transition was appropriate and not going to feel like that the transition wasn't going to change the character of the neighborhood, I guess, if that makes sense. So I think these feel appropriate, but yeah, that transition piece is really important, and I'm glad that got to the vision statement earlier.
Yeah, great point. So yeah, any other thoughts on the heights? Again, Evans currently 3 stories, which means up to 4, potentially going to 5 to 7. And I think I mentioned this. The idea is that these will present a few alternatives that have sort of different height options in different locations that the community can provide feedback on. So these are sort of summary numbers, right? That not all the zoning along these corridors is currently the same. So I sort of looked at what the most predominant zoning was. And then again, these will be sort of the maximum heights, but not necessarily every portion of the corridor will be zoned to those heights, and certainly not built out to those heights. Lupe.
Along with the additional kind of conversations pertaining to heights, was there also, I assume, a kind of zoning clarity or maybe some changes with regards to parking requirements based on hopefully added mobility?
Yeah, that's something we can look at in the EHA included also as part of the incentives in some locations, options for reduced parking requirements. If additional affordable housing is provided, we already have other reductions and exemptions for other things like proximity to transit and providing other things. So we haven't looked too much at do we need other incentives or things like that in near southeast or other exemptions, but that's something that if people are interested in, we could potentially look at things like that.
Well, and in the conversation as it relates to Evans and other boulevards, I think it's really helpful in that conversation to understand if this has gone through a kind of a revolutionary kind of rezoning as we've seen in areas like Rhino, where you get the added kind of green space requirement and sidewalk edge, and that kind of the setback requirements of those have also been kind of looked at with that added kind of height for any new developments. Because I think what was mentioned, obviously trying to try to make, if we're going to have one stab at it, how do we do it so that it's both you kind of nail it at least the first time, and then anything that evolves after that just becomes an added bonus, right?
Yeah, right, absolutely. And yeah, as far as the sort of setbacks and landscaping, if you see down at the bottom of the page where we start talking about mixed use design, that'll be in that section. So yeah, we're definitely thinking about that. Dustin.
Just one more thing, I guess these are maximum allowables. I assume it's all with the caveat of it's still open to community consultation, right, and feedback. So someone can't be like, oh, I get 7 stories because I have 3 stories of low income and it's going to be a giant square concrete block.
So yeah, to some extent, as we've talked about, this plan won't rezone any properties. So any actual changes to the zoning will require going through another process that goes through planning board and city council. However, one of the main criteria for approving a rezoning is consistency with the plan. So if the plan recommends a height and somebody's coming in requesting to rezone to that height, it's usually pretty difficult for city council to deny it or request additional things if they're doing what the plan calls for. So it's sort of a yes and no.
So we could, if we are okay with these numbers, we could end up with a bunch of 60s, 80s-esque brutalist concrete towers.
So if we do this wrong, yes. But as I mentioned, these can be tied to requiring other things like improved design. And again, we'll get to some of the design recommendations here in a minute. But just like we can say, we don't want to see this additional height until we see improvements in mobility along the corridor. We can also say we don't want to see the additional height until we figure out enhanced design, whether that's through individual projects coming in with better design, or we get new design guidelines or improved zoning in the area to achieve that.
Okay.
Scott, the current development on Holly, because it says currently like Florida and Holly is currently 2 maximum, but the one that's going in like on Holly and what is that, Mexico, right there by the gas station by Esther's, that's more than 2, right?
Yeah, the new townhomes there are
right.
3-story, 3.5-story, something like that.
Okay. And so that would be considered, I was just looking down at that Florida and Holly, that's already above, so however that happened on Holly, that's bigger than what is currently saying is the current 2 maximum. Does that make sense?
Right, so that, yeah, the Holly in Florida is really just when the heights there are that commercial shopping center right
That's
there at the
that
intersection.
specific one. Okay, not all of Holly then.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
For
Yeah,
whatever it's
you'll-
worth, it feels like, go ahead.
No, finish what you're saying, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, for whatever it's worth, those new townhomes that are going in, I'm sure there's a variety of opinions on them. But as far as like the sidewalk setback, like I just walked Holly Evans to Leedsdale, and it's the best section of sidewalk on Holly, right? So the setback, however, they're tall, but they're off the road, and it's a great stretch of sidewalk, for a couple of feet in there before you hit the gas station and the light pole and the utilities.
Yeah, I hear you.
And all those were developed under they're all 3-story zoning, all under the base zoning. So those sidewalks and everything came with what the city requirements were, just FYI. There's no incentive height or anything given there.
Yeah, that one, although that one we did have a little extra leverage because it was the old CDOT property, which the city bought from the state and then sold on to the developer. And so we were able to put a few extra conditions on it, mostly around including affordability at the other CDOT site. But yeah, we had a little more control over what happened there than a standard development because we were the property owner there for a little bit. All right, any other comments or concerns about exploring these heights in these locations? Again, can be paired with design improvements and things like that. Spencer.
The only thing I would say about Florida and Holly is, so I live on Hudson, so I'm like directly behind that shopping center right there. 4 stories, my only concern with that would be like, it's going to be looking, especially further to the west, it's going to be looking right down into people's backyards. And you can already kind of see that awkward situation over on Louisiana and Dahlia, where you've got those apartment complexes that are just like looking into single family homes. Like there's no privacy. So just a thought that 4 stories might be pushing it there at Florida and Holly, especially on the west side.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair point. Maybe something that could be addressed through these residential protection standards or other transition requirements. But yeah, I think that's a fair point. Lupe, did you have another?
Yeah, I think just along those lines, because I actually hadn't read through the Florida Holly was being looked at as being a 3 to 4 story incentive. I think having that greater density is great. I think the only difficulty that I would have is, with any of these potential build outs is obviously going to be the traffic studies that are going to be required, especially for that intersection. There's already been concern, I think, with Florida linking both Colorado and Monaco as it being a little bit of a raceway, if you will, where people kind of use that lane to kind of cut through traffic in lieu of Evans, and in doing so have kind of made it fairly dangerous. And so I think the biggest concern there is just taking a look at the overall traffic study, not in the immediacy, but also just on the overall extent of Florida, and seeing what impact any kind of additional height incentive would provide for that area.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And we'll talk a little later about some of the mobility, safety improvements, and other things that again should hopefully address some of those speeding concerns along streets like Florida. But and again, making sure that those things come in together, that we're not putting all the growth in and then trying to catch up on the safety improvements and things like that afterwards. All right, so then speaking of the local centers like Florida and Holly, one of the things we've talked about is potentially creating new local centers within the community. And as I mentioned, some folks are in favor of that idea, some folks less so. So it's something we're thinking of exploring again with this idea of producing a few alternatives to share with the community and gather feedback on. So we were sort of talking about this as where could those locations be, and what we're sort of looking at is some of the locations along the creek where the streets intersect the creek at places like Florida, Monaco, or Quebec. And some of these would potentially entail changing over existing residential to mixed use. So we understand that could be somewhat controversial. So that's why we sort of want to think through this idea, even if we're not necessarily recommending it at this point, even before we start vetting this idea with the public, trying to understand if there are strong concerns from you all on the steering committee that we need to think about. So I guess, does anyone have any concerns that we should not be even really exploring this idea with the public, or think we should? Erica.
I actually have no concern about those areas. However, I wanted to add, I don't know if I could add a local center, but I would really like to see, I think there's a lot of potential in between the new Kmart development and Iliff. There's kind of an old center there that had like Yafa's Savory, and I think there's a CrossFit gym in there. It's never really done very well, and I think that there's so much potential for a center there, especially with the new development in the Kmart.
Yeah, right. That's a good point. Judy.
Where were you thinking about when you said Quebec and Cherry Creek?
So yeah, on that one, it's sort of constrained because the northeast corner is a park, so they can't do anything with that. The southwest corner is in Arapahoe County, so we don't have any control over what happens there. So that leaves the northwest corner, which is DPS property, and the southeast corner, which is the waste transfer station. So potentially seeing if there is opportunity. I know at some point DPS was looking at development on the north side of Place Bridge, there where the solar panels are. Maybe they would be interested in using some of that, although I know it's currently like their soccer field for the middle school. My understanding is the waste transfer station isn't going away, but maybe there's, along with upgrades to that, we can free up some space that could potentially be a small local center.
I think there's a problem with doing something with the Place Academy property, with two neighborhoods, one on the north and we are on the east. So there are concerns with what happens with that. They did expand the solar farm there, I noticed. In the last year, it's been expanded. So just wanted to put my 2 cents worth in.
No, thanks. Yeah, that's what we want to understand is are there things that are going to just make people upset so that we can have a good conversation about it, right? If it's something that people are immediately going to have a strong negative reaction to, it's better that we know that now instead of putting that out there. And then we get a lot of unhappy feedback about, and people really focus on one issue that isn't that important of a recommendation to begin with. It's something we could do at a different location or accomplish through other means. So thanks for that feedback.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Yeah. Lupe.
I'm just curious, do you mention that there may be potential displacement of single-story family homes? I'm trying to find, I'm on the zoning map now, and I'm trying to find where that could possibly be, where there's already an existing kind of vehicular path, if you will, for a Cherry Creek Drive, if you will.
Yeah.
Everything,
So
everything that I see right now, there's already 3-story and 2-story just to the northwest of Potenza Park, where there's already apartments and kind of the 3-story elements, and I'm not really quite seeing where the potential redesign would occur where it displaces the single-story units.
Yeah, and I think it would be something that would be a fairly small center. So it's something that maybe looking around Holly there. On the north side, there's 3 houses that front Holly south of Vale. Maybe those could be redeveloped into a small mixed-use development. Again, not that that's necessarily where it would be, but that is the kind of thing we are thinking of exploring, right? So it wouldn't necessarily require a new street network or new street connections. It would be something that would replace existing housing with.
So it would take the place of the residential, which is basically south of Vale along the Cherry Creek, and you're looking at having traffic exit directly onto Vale, then access Holly. Is that the thought?
I mean, we haven't gotten so far as to think about how the traffic flow would work, but especially in these types of small, well, depending on how big it is, some of the parking needs could be fairly minimum.
I would suggest this, just because there's already the congruency of Cherry Creek North Drive as basically is heading west. It's an awkward connection that you have to then take Holly south and then reconnect back to Cherry Creek Drive to continue to head west. There's McMean Elementary that's already there on that corner. That's, with my kids kind of being in the neighborhood, then when they're walking to school, that's the one area that I'm always having them to be fairly kind of vigilant on. And I think kind of adding an element like that would already kind of just add to that complexity of that traffic area. So I think if anything, if there was going to be that suggestion, it would have to be, how could we make that intersection even better? But you're bridging over Cherry Creek. I mean, there's a lot going on with that I'm having trouble trying to imagine how that could be a positive. But I'm always willing to see how it could be.
Yeah, no, I mean, these are exactly the kinds of concerns that we want to hear about. And again, that maybe that's not the right place to propose it, or if we do propose it, maybe it is tied to other intersection and other mobility improvements. Yeah, I totally hear you about right across from the elementary school. Maybe that's not the right place for it.
I mean, as you head further north and you get to Leedsdale, I think there's definitely some positive development that's happening there. I think with the senior housing that's gone up, and with the kind of the retail components that are kind of around that zone. I mean, obviously, I don't think anybody wants to see Santiago's move, but still, there's the possibility of all those spaces having another opportunity to kind of become a little bit more urban. I think would be fantastic.
Yeah. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, this is just kind of another suggestion of a place, but it actually ties in really well with what Guadalupe was just saying. But there's a big power transfer station just west of George Washington High School. It's right on Leedsdale. It's a huge plot of land that is really well connected to Cherry Creek and further south. in the near southeast area, like especially considering multimodal or biking there. I don't know what the feasibility is to redevelop that or who owns that land, but it seems like a pretty big missed opportunity that could be repurposed.
Yeah, and that's Excel that owns that, and that's part of their electricity distribution network, part of the grid. So I don't know what opportunities there are to do something different with that. My understanding is that those things tend to stay for the long term, and we can get them to put up better screening. But other than that, there's not a lot that's going to change. But it's worth asking about. So yeah, thanks. Councilwoman Black.
I was just gonna say what you basically said. Excel can't move that. It's integral to the way electricity is distributed across our city, and they would have to find somewhere else to move it. And I used to work at George Washington High School, and we talked about it a lot, but there's no way that can move. I agree, it's unfortunate, but we do like our electricity.
Yeah, thanks, Councilwoman. Spencer.
I'm just kind of curious, what's the city and the group's appetite for biting into any of the parks? Because I mean, similarly to what you're seeing with Glendale, I mean, they're basically gonna get rid of Creekside Park to develop that entire area for like a multi-use entertainment district. I wasn't sure if like the city was, personally, I like my parks, but I wasn't sure what the appetite was for like maybe nibbling into sections of the park to develop as well.
Yeah, that is pretty much a non-starter. Any designated parkland to change to a different use has to go to a vote of the people. And I don't know if you've been paying attention at all to what's been happening at the Park Hill Golf Course, which is not designated parkland, but does have a conservation easement and all the controversy around that. I think I would be afraid if we proposed anything like that.
That's fine. I'll stick to my dog park argument then.
Yeah, that's much better to think about. What other park uses can we put on parkland instead of selling it to a developer? That I don't think would go over well.
Sounds good.
But yeah, I appreciate the question. It's great to ask about these things. So don't shy away from asking questions like that. But, yeah, Jared.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, it feels like that the redevelopment, it feels like there's enough shopping centers in the neighborhoods. It's mostly just a redevelopment of them, right? So the dairy, brought in housing. There's obviously the shopping center right next to that will probably get redeveloped at some point, and right across the street, like to the point, if we can just keep Santiago's as a part of the new development. So is there a way to think through how to more maximize current shopping and local centers, as opposed to that we need to put more in? It's like, or we could just improve the ones that are here. Sorry, guys are mowing the lawn. Not electric lawnmowers in the neighborhood.
That's all right. It's not really coming through, at least for me. But yes, that's sort of the question is do we want to not look at this, and maybe even if we explore the option of adding local centers, and we hear from the community, know that we won't end up with these recommendations. But I think regardless of that, we do want to improve the existing corridors and these shopping centers along Leedsdale and other places. The reason that we are exploring this is that we have goals of everybody being within a 10-minute walk of a center or corridor. And there are currently places within near Southeast that are outside that 10-minute walk shed. So that's why we're looking at potentially adding it. We can also focus on improving the existing centers and corridors and improving mobility and access to them as an alternative, but we thought it was worth exploring opportunities to potentially add centers within the neighborhood. Okay. So let's move along here. We've got quite a few more things that I want to get through. So we talked a bit about the mixed use design. As I mentioned when going through the results, what we're hearing from the community is improved landscaping, some wider setbacks, wider sidewalks, removing parking from right on the street, putting that behind the building to the side into a garage, something like that. And then encouraging more interesting, varied, unique building designs. So those seem to be the things. And transition, I should put transitions in here as well. But those seem to be the things that we're hearing from the community that they would like, that are most important in improving the design of mixed use buildings. Anything else we're not thinking of, or any other concerns around these sort of design elements?
I'll just add, and then you kind of already said it in a little way, but it's just the greater percentage of street activation. Right. Pushing the car into the back and putting the pedestrians to the front.
Yep. Thanks, Christopher.
What do you guys mean by the are unique? I mean, that could be something very different to me, to Guadalupe or someone else. I mean, is the city trying to promote, like, we want very, very different types of buildings, or more? What's that mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that was a word that was used in some of the comments we got from the community. So it's something we'll need to explore what folks really want from that. My impression is that people don't like the standard box that we see sort of built all over Denver. And so they would like something different, and ideally something that is sort of indicative of this part of town. So that's sort of what I was thinking, but if other folks have other thoughts about what that should mean or could mean, let us know.
I always think of that building that's like right off of Yale and I-25 that looks like a rainbow. Like, I don't love that building, but that's probably unique. So I don't know. I think having some framework of, like, there's wanting to have the building break up a little bit with material,
right.
Maybe not saying you have to have 4 different materials. It's just how you use the material in a good way, maybe something like that. But
right.
That's just my opinion.
There's I think one of the bigger pieces that I've always had trouble with is the idea that developers often, in order to maximize their rental, they'll go ahead and push everything right up to the property line. And I would love to see if there's a conversation that can take place in a way to rob Peter to pay Paul, in that maybe you provide with the height incentives, if you pull back so many feet from that property line and allow for actual plaza activation, that maybe there's opportunities there where you can break up that notion of the kind of the blatant square or flat surface, beyond just materiality, where you can actually start providing for that active use for the community.
Yeah, that's definitely something we can look at. We have zoning like that in Cherry Creek North. I think that there's incentives for providing active plaza space and things like that. So that's definitely something that could be looked at. And I think in general, I think we've heard from a lot of folks what you said about not liking the developers maximizing their space, bringing it right up to the property line. So I think even absent a sort of incentive talk, we want to look at just requiring some setbacks instead of allowing zero lot line development like the mixed use zone districts typically allow now. Jenny. You're muted, Jenny.
With what you were talking about with the setbacks and making adjustments for height if the setbacks are bigger. That's sort of what we did with the Good Neighbor Agreement at Colorado and Evans.
Yep.
The massing index is, we said, you know, you can build up to 12 stories, but with that, you've got to provide open space. And, you know, they basically have the same amount of square footage of building space. It's just different heights being used. And that is, I guess that would be considered unique, not the block building that we've been seeing so often lately.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good example in sort of outcome, assuming that gets built at some point, which hopefully it does. We'd like to get that sort of codified in the zoning so that we don't have to go through all of the effort we went in, you know, figuring out that Good Neighbor Agreement and how to enforce that and all that stuff, right? We don't want to have to do that for every development.
Yeah, but I guess maybe just using that terminology is in there. Play of the massing index. I don't really, I'm not a builder. I don't know the terminology,
Yeah.
but using that in there.
Yeah, definitely. And we have that in zoning elsewhere in the city in like the Rhino area. It has a similar element built into the zoning that we can look at. All right, anything else on mixed use? And again, this isn't covering every recommendation that we'll make about corridors and centers and mixed use development, but sort of the ones we wanted to make sure we talked about with you before we shared them with the public. So anything else on that before we move on to residential stuff? All right, so again, starting with some of the community feedback we've gotten, asking folks what missing middle options they felt were appropriate in their neighborhood. And again, keep in mind, we're keeping ADUs separate as something that should be allowed everywhere once we figure out the unique issues around the suburban context with those. So that's not an option. That wasn't an option in the survey question. But folks lean towards duplexes and the 3 and 4 plexes for the types of missing middle in terms of locations and under what circumstances they should be allowed, making sure they're compatible with development in the area around the edges and along the larger collector streets within the neighborhoods are where folks wanted to see those. And then thinking about the trade-offs, what folks are concerned about limiting involuntary displacement so that we're not seeing you know, people buying up small houses to tear down and put in relatively affordable small houses to tear down, you know, put into more expensive duplexes on the property or something like that. Finding ways to avoid that. And then a lot of the other ones are sort of limiting the size or shadows or apparent appearance of the house, and then also parking impacts. And then getting into what folks would like to see in terms of residential design, either for new builds or for additions or things like that. Again, it's sort of the size and appearance, the height, the distance between buildings, the distance between the building and the street, and the amount of yard space really seem to be the things most people are concerned about. So sort of how big does the building appear? How big does the house appear? So in terms of other comments, again, duplexes and triplexes could be okay within neighborhoods. More intense options like the row houses and maybe even small apartments. As we get to those transitions to the corridors, making sure that they are well-designed and fit into the neighborhood context, making sure they're affordable, and then making sure we have the mobility infrastructure, whether that's parking or improved sidewalks or bike lanes, so that as new people are added to these neighborhoods, they can move around safely. Everyone can continue to move around safely. So, given that input, thinking about the recommendations, first of all, for missing middle, any new missing middle that's added should be compatible with our residential design goals, which we'll talk about in the next bullet, but are really around that sort of size and appearance. Look at areas around the edges of neighborhoods for potential increases in density, allowing more of those townhomes and things like that. And then right now, there's not a duplex zone district, a 2-unit zone district within the suburban context, which most of near Southeast is in the suburban context. So can we create a duplex zone district that can be applied? And then thinking about how that should be applied. Should it be certain areas that have that, or should it be something that property owners could potentially come in under certain circumstances and rezone their individual properties into a duplex or things like that? So thoughts, questions, concerns about missing middle recommendations?
I guess the only question would be why stop at duplexes? Could do triplexes as well on some of these lots, or two adjoining lots could go into triplexes. I mean,
yeah, that's certainly something we could look at, especially along maybe some of the larger streets, allowing that. We have the zoning to allow that. There are existing zone districts that would allow that. But yes, that's definitely something we can look at. All right, any other thoughts or concerns, Jenny?
I don't know if this is part of the ADU conversation, but like a lot of the houses in my neighborhood, we just don't have space for ADUs because we don't have alleys. So would splitting homes up, like basement apartments, is that considered ADUs, or is that considered turning a home into a duplex? How does that fall into things?
It depends on sort of how you do it. It could be either. So there are what we call attached ADUs. So, what people traditionally think of as an ADU, the unit over a detached garage or in the backyard or something, is a detached ADU. You can also do an attached ADU, which is exactly what you talked about, turning your basement into an ADU. And then you still have to follow the ADU requirements, which means that the property owner has to live in one of the units essentially. And there's also limits on how big it can be and a few other things. If you wanted to be able to sell it or have rent out both units, then it would have to fall under a duplex use. And so that would be just an alternative way of doing it. It would provide a little more flexibility or a little less control, depending on how you think about it.
This might be a little radical, but what about, changing single family to include duplexes across the citywide? I know that that's probably for a different conversation, but it's something I've thought about often.
Yeah, I mean, that is sort of a conversation that we will have citywide as we look at implementing a missing middle citywide strategy. It is also the way that Blueprint thinks about things. If you remember the way Blueprint talks about residential places, there are 4 categories: residential low, low medium, high medium, and high. So low is the least dense, and that is single unit and 2 unit. So according to Blueprint, 2 unit uses, duplexes, are appropriate in every sort of single unit residential low area. So that's where we want to think about how do we want to allow those in the neighborhood. We could do exactly what you're saying and say, duplexes are appropriate in single unit areas. And if property owners want to come in and rezone their property to a duplex, they should be able to do that. Or we could put more guidance on it and say they're appropriate in these sub neighborhoods or these locations or under these circumstances. But again, there will be eventually a citywide regulatory project to address missing middle throughout the city.
Thanks.
Yeah, no, great question. All right, let's keep moving. So in terms of residential design within the residential neighborhoods, things we're talking about, limiting size of new development and additions really seems to be the main concern. If folks are interested in other sort of preservation tools, like a potential historic district or landmark district, we can work on identifying the areas that have consistent character, and then provide a menu of tools like landmark districts or conservation overlays or things like that neighborhoods could pursue. And then also, we're starting to see development pressure, redevelopment pressure within these neighborhoods by allowing more or directing more growth to the corridors and the centers and things like that. That can help moderate some of that redevelopment pressure within the neighborhoods. So that's sort of where we are on residential design and preservation. Like somebody raised their hand, Jenny.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That just sounds like a loophole. Maybe I'm not understanding it. It just sounds like a loophole to keep development out of neighborhoods, I guess.
Which part are you saying sounds like?
The residential design and preservation. I guess I'm not in a neighborhood where there's a whole lot of design that should be preserved, I guess. So maybe I'm missing something, and I'm not thinking of a particular area, but I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there. I sat on it for as long as I could without saying anything. Just throwing it out there. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. I mean, it's not intended to be a loophole, and the idea is that with these tools to preserve sort of the look and feel of the neighborhood, we can still integrate additional housing options that fits in, ADUs or duplexes that still fit the form that we want to see. So yeah, it's not intended to be an opt-out that neighborhoods can say, oh, we need to preserve our design characteristics, so we're not going to allow missing middle. It's a matter of making sure that the missing middle fits in with the design of the neighborhood.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, no,
I would just kind of agree on that end. to be honest with you. I mean, especially when you drive into the Highlands, you see this kind of cacophony of, modernistic mansions that have grown into what once bungalows existed, and it's tough. I think if you provide the incentives where you're actually trying to add a level of density, I think it makes a lot of sense while still providing an overlay that says, there's a way that to craftfully kind of make these revisions. And so I do appreciate the idea of the overlays more and more, especially as I've seen a lot of the neighborhoods really changing character where they haven't had the opportunity to have these overlays provided.
Right. Yeah, that's the idea. All right, we got about half an hour left, so let's keep moving. Now thinking about affordable housing and how we want to address that, we asked what types of affordable housing should be prioritized in your Southeast. We got for sale units and larger units rising to the top there, and what strategies we should be looking at. Increased density incentives, which are already sort of implemented through EHA, and then potentially flexible design standards for additional affordability. And how do we want to prevent or mitigate displacement, involuntary displacement in neighborhoods? So existing homeowner support for maintenance and rehab, adding more affordable units throughout the area, finding ways to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing as well, along with some other programs. And then thinking about options for people experiencing homelessness. What can we work into or provide locations for in near Southeast? Tiny homes, inclement weather shelters, and safe parking spaces are the ones that sort of got the most votes on that. So in terms of affordable housing, utilizing the new expanding housing affordability requirements so that every new development over 10 units will include at least some affordable housing. And then, the incentive that we talked about earlier, if they provide more affordable housing. Within that affordable housing, encouraging more for sale options and larger units for families, and then looking for additional opportunities for things like 100% affordable development or things like that, especially near transit opportunities. Judy, you have your hand up.
I'm just a little bit, I haven't read through all of the affordability ordinance, but living in a community where I live, all of these HOAs here have fees that they charge to their homeowners every month. And those fees pay for expenditures that they have, plus it goes into a reserve fund so that when they have unexpected expenditures or replacements of like sprinkler systems, roofs, painting, carpentry, that pays for that. And I'm wondering how that's, or if we are affected by this in any way, or how that actually works for us in this community.
So the expanding housing affordability applies to new development. They have to make these requirements and pay increased linkage fees, which goes into a fund for affordability. And then there's also an assessment on properties throughout the city to help pay for affordable housing. I don't remember, did that change with the EHA as well? Did we up that assessment? I don't know if either of the council members remember.
Well, as you well know, we're in an interesting community out here because we have a lot of unincorporated Arapahoe County. as well. And so we've got two jurisdictions. And Arapahoe County operates different from Denver, and they're right next door to us here. And that's an issue I think that, will need to be addressed in the future out here.
Yep.
For sure.
Yeah, definitely hear you on that. Any other comments on the affordable housing recommendations? And thinking about displacement, connecting residents to existing programs for eviction prevention, down payment assistance, maintenance and rehab help, things like that. Our Department of Housing Stability host is developing what they call a prioritization policy, which will allow us to sort of target marketing for new affordable housing options to people who are potentially displaced from nearby areas. So trying to give people who may be displaced a first opportunity to get into affordable housing in their same neighborhood. And then making sure that where we do see large public investments, that we are pairing that with specific strategies to address displacement that can be potentially caused by this additional investment from the city. And then thinking about homelessness, creating more permanent supportive housing to get people off the street and into permanent housing where they can receive other treatments and making sure that we're connecting to those who need that supportive housing and getting them in those. The city is expanding resources for programs like early intervention and the STAR program. So making sure that we're using those city resources to help the people experiencing homelessness in near Southeast, improving the connections for people experiencing homelessness to shelters and services so they can find those and get the help they need. Look for opportunities for safe parking or tiny home options within near Southeast, and then also raising awareness in the community on what to do in these situations. We were just in a meeting this afternoon talking about this stuff with a member of the police department who was saying, if you come across people camping or other people in need, instead of calling the police, calling 911, better off calling 311. That'll get the early intervention team out there, and they were better able to connect folks to services and follow up and make sure they're getting those instead of sending the police. So, just raising awareness of what the community should do in those situations so that we can get the right services in place where needed. All right. Moving on to businesses, we asked folks what businesses they would like to see more of in near Southeast. Not surprising, restaurants came out on top, followed by coffee shops, bakeries, specialty food stores. And then thinking about what strategies we should be looking at to encourage these businesses or support existing businesses in the area. Loan programs, collaboration with developers and local business support are all things we should look at. So, looking at how we can encourage community serving local businesses, especially restaurants, again, is what we've heard from the community. Support for existing business associations, potentially new business associations. Right now, there's only one in the area, the East Evans association. So maybe looking at helping, businesses on Leedsdale or something form a new association. And then potentially upgrading those business associations into business improvement districts. We met with Nancy and some other business owners earlier this week, and it said something. They said that's something they have been thinking about. So there are city programs to help them do that if that's something they want to pursue. Connect businesses and people looking to start businesses to existing services. Our Economic Development Office, DEDO, has a lot of programs to help new businesses or existing businesses. So making sure that we make those connections. And then, this came up earlier when we were talking about Evans, but trying to attract some additional entertainment options, concert venues, something like that into near Southeast. Erica.
Speaking of that, and I'm not sure if this is something we've discussed in the past, but I had one of those moments like Kevin Costner in Field of Dreams where he sees the baseball field in the field. I was driving down Iliff the other day, and I think this was right after I had gone to Jazz in the Park the other day. And I was thinking, my goodness, this retention pond that we have, in the 12 years I've lived in my neighborhood, I've seen it flood once. And it occurred to me, could we not build some sort of concert venue in the retention pond made out of just concrete? So it would just be like concrete risers. And we could have a stage, and it could be a place to have almost like a Jazz in the Park type opportunity, or even just, have it maintained a little bit more than the weeds that grow there now. And, if it floods once in a blue moon, it floods, but it wouldn't destroy the infrastructure of what we would build there. And in the meantime, it could be this amazing community gathering space, and food trucks could pull up on the road along Iliff. And, I had this whole oh my gosh, now I can't unsee this moment. So I've been waiting to say that.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something we're looking at that location or somewhere else in the park. I've actually got a meeting with Arts and Venues agency tomorrow to talk about what that would take. Is that something that we could explore, something like Levitt Pavilion over at Ruby Hill Park? Is there a way to get something like that in near Southeast, whether in that detention pond facility or one of the other parks in the area? So yes, I agree. It's something we are looking into.
And I guess just to be clear, because I live slightly closer to that than Erica, maybe a little bit closer to the creek than Erica does, as long as that's still maintained as the overflow. But it's certainly, like she said, a lot of the time it's not flooded unless they haven't cleared the drains and water's pooling like it is right now. But yeah, people walk down there, walk their dogs down there. So it is kind of an open space that does serve a, once in 10-year odd purpose, but could be multi-purpose as well.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, like I said, we're sort of looking into this concert venue idea. Can we do it on public land somewhere? I think also, even if we don't, for whatever reason, get to a recommendation for a concert venue there, we want to think about what can we do with that detention pond. Because yeah, as you said, right now it's just sort of a bowl full of weeds. And I think there are opportunities to do something more with that. Whether it's a concert venue or something else that better serves the community while maintaining its flood prevention duties as well. All right. So let's move on to mobility. I'm going to switch over to a map here. So thinking about where we want to make prioritize safety improvements. We've heard improving safety is important to the community. It's important to our Vision Zero goals. So we know there's a lot of improvements that we need to make, but we want to think about what are the most important locations. So as part of the survey, we asked folks to tell us where they have the most concern or where they think it's most important to make pedestrian safety improvements, and then we'll talk about bike safety improvements in just a minute. But the things that rose to the top were the Quebec corridor, Florida corridor, and then particularly intersections at Leetsdale and Monaco, Leetsdale and Quebec, Holly and Mississippi, Cherry Creek Drive, Monaco and Cherry Creek Drive, and Florida, and then Evans and Holly, Evans, and Dahlia are the ones that seem to get the most pins, the most comments from the community. And then we also compare that to where we see crashes occurring. So you can see the dots represent crash counts, and the X's represent other crash locations. So you can see, some of the data supports this of where we're seeing crashes that we need to be addressing. And then the idea is that we will identify the locations that we need to prioritize for these improvements and say, these are the types of improvements that should be considered here. And then Dottie in a future process will sort of design and implement the appropriate improvements. It's the way the recommendations will most likely work. Dustin.
Yes, I think this was like one of the very early things we've done, and I think things have certainly changed since then, and I don't see them, but Yale, Yale's right on kind of the limit of where we're looking at, but Yale at Monaco, there is a pedestrian crossing there, but heading east on Yale at those Monaco lights, it goes from 4 lanes, 2 of the outer ones are turning, and then 2 center ones go immediately to a merge, followed by a pedestrian crossing, which is always fun to navigate for vehicles and people. So I think that one probably needs to be looked at with the increase in traffic through there. And similarly, there is another pedestrian crossing towards Quebec on Yale, right next to Bible Park, which apparently stopping for pedestrians is optional. But tailgating the car in front of you that does want to stop is a must. So I think those certainly, from a pedestrian standpoint, need to be prioritized on this list. I feel like that certainly got a lot worse in terms of just traffic and speed and all that in the last 6-12 months since we last looked at that.
Yeah, great. Thanks for those suggestions. Spencer.
For that Colorado to Holly, Florida section, I would be kind of curious, are all those probably bicyclists that are getting hit? Because, one recommendation, I think when we broke out into our small groups with like the overall community, no one really raised it, but like having actual protected bike lanes down that road, because I walk across Florida all the time, and there's not a day I walk down that street that I do not see someone driving in the bike lane. Like they're not paying attention, like they're looking down, or they are just negligent drivers. So, I mean, that I think protected bike lanes on Florida are like an absolute must for this project.
Yeah. Yeah, Jason, do you remember if this map is just pedestrian crashes, or is this pedestrian and bike on this map?
So Scott, this is just pedestrian, and Scott's got, right after this, we do have the bicycle information. Yep. So, but yeah, to your point, I do remember hearing that, and I think Scott will get into this maybe a little bit in the next couple of slides, but that's where we would look to Dottie to kind of use their toolbox and what might be the most appropriate fit along Florida Avenue. But that, yeah, that's certainly a location. I think we do have that identified in the bicycle map here to follow.
Yeah,
for sure. Because again, I love using Florida to like even cut
Yeah.
over to Wash Park, like, you know, cross Colorado, straight over to the,
right.
basically to the park.
Yep.
Yeah, and you're certainly not alone. And I think that's why it popped both from a pedestrian standpoint, and you'll see in the next couple of slides from a bicyclist standpoint as well, that a lot of folks take that route just like you do. So it certainly kind of rose to the top.
Sure. Thanks, y'all.
Councilwoman Black.
I just wanted to respond to Dustin's request about Yale. Dottie is putting some, I don't know the acronym, but they're the rapid flashing beacon lights or whatever they're called at both of those Highline crossings at Bible Park. I've been asking them to improve that section of Yale also for 7 years. They have made some improvements, but they are going to install those this year. And then with Arapahoe County, Denver is doing some major improvements on Yale, starting with a underpass at the Highline Canal at Holly and Yale. And then east of Holly, it's Arapahoe County, and they're going to widen Yale. So there's quite a lot of work that's going to happen on Yale.
Thank you.
All right. So yeah, then thinking about the bicycle improvements. So again, this is where we sort of saw the most comments from the community. A lot of these along Yale, as we were talking about, and also along Florida and Monaco are where a lot of those bike concerns are. And then again, looking at some of the crash data, some of it matches up, at least with the corridors. And so, yeah, these are thinking about improvements to bicycle crossings at intersections. And then we'll talk in the next slide about changes to or additions to the bike networks and new bike lanes or bike facilities. Erica.
I just was hoping to add the intersection of Oneida and Evans, because I think it's an important corridor from Bible Park to Cook Park.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a crash there too. So that's a good suggestion. Spencer, did you have additional comments?
Sorry about that. No, I do not.
Okay, no problem. Jenny.
If we're adding intersections on Birch and Evans that connects the University Hills North to the light rail station, the Colorado station, it's a mess, and it keeps getting overlooked by studies. Just keeps getting pushed aside. So I'll keep plugging it in when I can.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And then again, thinking about the bike lanes or bike facilities. So the underlying map here, the solid lines are existing bike facilities. The dashed lines are routes that are already part of our citywide bike plan. So the things that the city already plans to implement. And then the boxes indicate, again, where we've heard from the community, they would like to see additional bike facilities, bike lanes. So then thinking about what we want to do, Dahlia, the section of Dahlia is already identified, so maybe prioritizing that. Exposition and Mississippi up here as potential new additions to the bike lane map. And then Holly and Quebec came up a lot from the community. But before we start recommending bike lanes on those, we need to understand the impacts and the trade-offs in terms of potentially losing parking lanes or travel lanes, potential impacts to other future improvements. If we want to put dedicated transit on Quebec, if we've put in bike lanes, do we create a conflict there? And then also thinking about parallel streets that we've already identified. So we have Oneida, Monaco, and Jasmine all already identified as future bike facilities. So is it worth thinking or concentrating our efforts on implementing those parallel networks as opposed to putting our efforts on to Holly and Quebec? So a few things to think about there. Harvey.
Yeah, I'm confused on the exposition bike path. And Dottie keeps pushing this bike path to nowhere. So I don't see the importance of it. It's not going to go on Quebec, or at this point, certainly there's no reason to put a bike lane on or even space, put the bike lane on Quebec coming off exposition. The bikes that come through are either trying to get to Crestmore Park or to Lowry, or if they're going south, they're using the bike lane facility or the facility over off of by GW High School. But coming down exposition just doesn't make sense. The Dottie, given a presentation and the facts that they had shown were incorrect. And we have a bike path going out exposition to nowhere. And it cuts over to Alameda, which could happen off of Kearney when they're putting in the Kearney extension. So I don't see any reason why the exposition could possibly improve the grid.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea with exposition is at the west end, it connects to 4 Mile Park and Cherry Creek Trail. And then at the east end, as you mentioned, it runs into Quebec and the cemetery. If we can work with the cemetery to get a connection to the Highline Canal Trail, which runs through the cemetery, I think
that's been looked at for so many years. The cemetery will not publicly come out and say that is a bike connection. They don't mind if bikers come through the cemetery, but they don't want to put themselves at risk and say this is a bike path going through the cemetery because of some, I don't know if it's insurance or legal issues that they don't want to fight. Just like they don't want us to put a stoplight at Virginia going across into the cemetery. They don't mind if you come in, but they don't want to invite people to come in.
Yeah, I get that. Judy.
I'm trying to look at this, and are you proposing bike lanes on Quebec from where to where?
Well, the question is, do we want to propose bike lanes on Quebec? But the way we would look at it is, sort of the whole length of the area from Alameda down to Yale.
Okay.
That's what we've heard from the community is they'd like that connection.
Right. But I know in one of the breakout groups, there was a lady that said absolutely no bike lanes on Quebec. Particularly in my area, it just would not work. We've got ambulances, as I said before, fire trucks, police cars traveling on that corridor all the time, going at very fast speeds. A bike lane would be a big mistake. It's a main arterial, and it gets a lot of traffic. So I'm hoping that at least in my area from Evans all the way up to Alameda, that it isn't even wide enough from Leetsdale to Alameda.
Right.
It's down to 2 lanes there.
Yeah.
Big mistake.
Yeah, I think those are all valid concerns. So would you be more interested in concentrating efforts on the Oneida connection here just to the west?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Jared.
Yeah, I was just gonna say regarding Holly, I mean, there's already bikes that come up and down. I mean, we live on Holly, and yeah, I think it would make a ton of sense. I think my only question would be, it would make sense to go like all the way up the hill, obviously to Alameda, and there would just be some significant concerns with that hill there because there's not currently sidewalks on either side. So I'm not sure exactly how you would pull that off north of Leetsdale up to Alameda. But as far as from Leetsdale all the way down to Evans, I mean, that's everybody's coming down the hill already to hit Cherry Creek Trail down here. And it feels like that would be helpful.
Yeah, I totally hear you on that hill. When we did a bike tour, we biked up that little hill. It was a bit of a pain. Spencer, go ahead.
Yeah, going on to Holly. I don't know, maybe just because I've had some shoddy phone quality recently, but did we say we were wanting that to be buffered too? Because people fly down Holly.
Yeah, we hadn't really talked about what the form of it would be, but yeah, I think for a street as busy as Holly, we would want to put in a protected bike lane of some kind.
All right, cool. Because I just noticed looking at the map, it maybe I'm looking at it wrong, but it showed, oh yeah, sorry, it doesn't show it on there. So I'm looking at the wrong side. Okay, cool.
And Scott, I'm assuming that you guys always work with like fire because again, we run a fire lane down Holly. So however that all pans out with protected lanes.
Yeah, absolutely. That all goes into the design. You know, if we decide to do it, absolutely work with the fire department to make sure that the fire trucks still can navigate that safely. All right, we are at 8 o'clock. We've got a couple more items that I'd like to get through. So if folks are willing to stay on for a few more minutes, that would be great. If you need to go, that's all right. Totally understand. I don't like holding you guys later, but for anyone who can stick around, we've got just a couple more that I'd like to run through. Let me get this back up here. All right. So thinking about sustainability, we know is a big priority for the committee and the council members in this area. So what benefits of landscaping are people most interested in? Habitat for wildlife and pollinators came out on top, which was a bit surprising, but I think is really interesting that people are really interested in that. Improved look and feel, reduced water use, also priorities. And then in terms of green energy, what would encourage people to use more renewable or green energy, lower installation costs, more options from Excel. This sort of broadly covers a lot of topics, but encouraging or requiring climate appropriate landscaping and trees to reduce our water use for landscaping, encouraging reduced water use in businesses and houses and new development, supporting access to solar and renewable energy options, either on people's property or through Excel or other providers. Looking at more green infrastructure options, so integrating more landscaping into our streets, and also looking at this contemporary parkways idea, which are things we've recommended in other plans, which are picking out a few streets that have additional mobility needs and also opportunities to integrate more landscaping, more green infrastructure and things like that. So they wouldn't be traditional parkways. We wouldn't be putting in a median or anything like that, but finding locations where we're making bike improvements, putting in protected bike lanes, also adding additional landscaping options and things like that. So maybe looking at these as places, some of the streets that are connecting the parks in near Southeast, prioritizing them for contemporary parkways. And then we were just talking about this with some folks this morning, that it seems like there's pretty strong support for this stuff. So can we sort of use near Southeast as an example, use it as a leader for the city in advancing some of these sustainability and resiliency goals to really sort of set the bar and encourage other neighborhoods in the city to follow along. Dustin.
Yeah, so just a quick one, and it might be too specific, but I'll put it out there because it seems relatively new, but in terms of like renewable energies and solar, but community batteries. So if there are a lot of solar panels in this area, they can go to a large communal battery, then anyone in the community can draw from, part of sustainability and all that. Certainly a government / business investment, because those things are more than the household can afford.
Yeah, no, I like that. We were also talking about things like that earlier today about, are there sort of district solutions that we could look at trying to encourage with this plan of, and that's certainly one of them. If we can identify a neighborhood or a set of blocks that are interested in that, trying to advance something like that. I like that idea. Erica.
Or rainwater collection for watering of landscaping.
Yep.
Does that come with rain as well?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, that's one of those things where there's complicated laws around water use and what you can do with rainwater, but I think there are options these days to set up rain barrels and things like that, as long as it then eventually goes back into the system.
I think on that note, and I know we talked about this before, but it's frustrating. I'm currently living away from my home while we're renovating, and I'm living with my parents, and they live very close to 7th Avenue, and it's just frustrating sometimes to see these big, wide, green, beautifully landscaped areas that are part of the city and county of Denver, and they're full of grass and plantings that are maintained by the city that we all pay taxes for. And it's frustrating that they have so much and we get so little. And as I drive around the city, I see this, and it's, is there a way to maybe renegotiate a more equal solution for everybody to have a little bit of greenery, rather than certain communities having so much?
Yeah, I mean, that's a important question, I think, and something that we need to think about is what is equitable access to those types of amenities. And you're absolutely right. There are certain neighborhoods that have those and have them in abundance, and there are other neighborhoods that don't. We were talking about Monaco, and Monaco is a designated parkway, even though the part that runs even in near Southeast, but the part that runs through near Southeast doesn't look or function like a parkway. And you think about it further north, where it's a really nice parkway, and how can we get it to function more like a parkway, even if we can't get in that super wide median or anything like that. But there are certainly improvements we can make to make it better for the community and greener and things like that. Absolutely. All right, I think there's 2 left here that we want to look at. So thanks for sticking with me. Community safety. We asked folks sort of what we should be prioritizing in terms of improving safety in the area. Improving lighting where we have a lack of lighting or poor lighting, but at the same time, making sure we're not overlighting things or contributing to light pollution. Supporting mental health and addiction treatment for those that need it. and then working with the community and the police department to address property crime. As I mentioned, we were talking with one of the police officers today, and he was reinforcing things about making sure you get your packages off your porch, making sure you close your garage and lock your doors and things like that. So how can we make sure that community groups are reinforcing these things and taking simple steps to help prevent crime? And then last one, thinking about how we can sort of improve the sense of community connection, community identity in near Southeast. So we asked what locations or activities people most enjoy meeting people, where they most meet people, where they would like to do that more. So at sort of specific locations like the parks, trails, rec center, and shopping areas, and then also contributing to the look and feel, giving that sense of community. And then in terms of what sort of defines the identity of near Southeast, again, that look and feel, and also the parks and trails. So we want to look at ways to strengthen that sense of identity through the design. Are there elements of the design of near Southeast that we can incorporate in more locations to strengthen that identity, capitalizing on those parks and trails and other assets that we have in near Southeast? Encourage more opportunities for interactions at destinations like the parks and the rec center, and also at more community events, so more folks get to know each other. And then building capacity of organizations, the neighborhood organizations and other things in the area, and encouraging them to coordinate, so we get a better coordination and collaboration between neighborhoods and organizations. So any thoughts? I know I ran through these last couple pretty quick. Any thoughts on either of those before we wrap up? Okay.
No, I would just say facilitating that cooperation between communities and organizations is essential in building communities. So
right.
Anything we can do.
Great. All right. Well, thank you everybody for sticking around and for providing a lot of great feedback. This is really helpful. So we will, as I said, we're currently drafting recommendations. So our goal is to get these out in July. Our current plan is to have 2 workshops. I think we talked about this last month. One virtual, one in person. Tentative dates for those, which should be confirmed shortly, are July 13th and July 21st. The 13th would be the virtual meeting. That is the second Wednesday. So that would be the night of our steering committee meeting in July. So the idea is to replace the steering committee meeting with that virtual workshop. And then 21st would be Thursday, the following week. And that would be the in-person workshop at 4 Mile Historic Park, Thursday evening. So like I said, we're close to confirming those. Once we do, we'll send that information out and ask you to help spread the word about those upcoming events. But that is the plan for next month at this point. Erica.
Really quick, I just don't know, Scott, if I don't have it at my fingertips, but the Cook Park once a month thing I sent to you about the food trucks, maybe that would be a great time to meet up sometime. So I just wanted to throw it out there while we're on the meeting.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for sending that. And yes, we are looking at that as an option for community engagement. But yeah, if the steering committee wants to meet up at one of those as well, I think that would be great. And that ties in with Jared's question in the chat. We are working on planning that. So we are figuring out the route, and then we will send out a poll here before too long to find some dates for that. So we haven't forgotten about it. We're working on it though.
And I'll say it does involve a happy hour, so that's more incentive to join us when we do get this sent out to you guys.
All right, so that's all I have for tonight. Let me know if you think of anything after we've gone through this, if you sleep on it and something pops into your head that you wish you had said, just shoot me an email, let me know. Yeah, really appreciate all the great feedback tonight, and we'll be in touch soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.